Okay, everyone. In this video, I'm going to cover the Lightning Network, just looking at a two-party channel. Okay. Now, the advantage of this with this Lightning Network is that you can send money both ways. You can send it back and forth between one another. This is very useful. Right. You're not stuck only being able to send it one way. All right. And this is just a two-party channel. I'll make another video showing like we can actually use a network. We can send, even if you don't have a channel set up with someone, you can send money to someone else through them. And for this one, we'll just show kind of the basics of how this works. All right, just like before, you have a funding transaction output that we're going to say it's 20 Bitcoin, just like we did in the previous video. And Alice and Bob both have to sign it, right? So they have this 20 Bitcoin that they can send back and forth to each other on this second layer, or here is this Lightning Network. All right. Now, before we had these refund transactions, that's so this money wouldn't get stuck and Bob couldn't hold it hostage. Now the Lightning channel, they do something where we have these commitment transactions, and it's for both Bob and Alice. Right? And what makes these unique is like we have this additional feature where they have this revoke key, right, where they can revoke a transaction after a certain period here. All right, so let's just kind of draw this out to show what's going on. So Alice is going to have a commitment transaction. All right. And so what's up with this? Well, it's got Bob's signature on it. So she can sign it. All right. We know for certain that Bob's address will receive 2 Bitcoin. This is the first transaction they send each other. Alice is sending 2 Bitcoin from this 20 that she used to fund to Bob. Now, what about this other potentiality? Well, if Alice signs it, and after 100 blocks passes, well, she gets this other 18 Bitcoin. Right? But there's another potentiality, though. That is, if they agree not to use this one, and someone's going back on their word and using it, right? Well, Bob can revoke this with this revoke key, as long as he catches it before 100 blocks are up. He can use this revoke key, and then Bob will claim this 18 Bitcoin as well. He'll get the 2 Bitcoin here, and he'll also get this other 18 Bitcoin. Okay? And the same goes for Bob. He'll have a commitment transaction, because you never know which way are these going to go, is the way to think about it. Like, you don't know which. Is it going to go forwards or is it going to go backwards? Is money being sent to Bob, forwards, back? Is money being sent to Bob, or is money being sent to Alice? So they're always going to both get these commitment transactions. So they'll both have these available. And what does Bob say? Well, first, Alice's signature is going to be on it. No. So one of the signatures is already there. And here, with this, Alice is going to get 18 Bitcoin. But the other two, there's 2 different potentialities. One, if Bob signs it and 100 blocks passes by after this is added and nothing happens, well, then Bob gets his 2 Bitcoin. But the other potentiality is, well, they agreed to do this. Bob tries to spend it anyway, and they said that, well, hey, we're not going to spend this. We're going to do no transaction. If Alice catches it, well, she can use this revoke key, block it, and then claim, these 2 Bitcoins. Okay. All right. So the key here, the difference is this time transaction. It takes 100 blocks, and you have this revoke private key that you can use. That could like revoke this if they've agreed not to, to use it before. All right. Well, so what's to stop someone from always using the revoke key and being dishonest and blocking it? Well, I'll explain this here in a second. Let me erase this first. All right. Let's say we had the funding transaction. Yeah. For Alice and Bob is 20 Bitcoin. Okay. So they're doing this one transaction, like we said. Alice is sending 2 Bitcoin to Bob. So she would get 18 sent to her address, and 2 would be sent to Bob's address. But they want to do another transaction. Okay. Well, what's to keep them if they want to do this other transaction? All right. Here, Alice will get a Bitcoin back from Bob. So Bob would only get 1 Bitcoin sent to his address, and Alice will get 19. Well, what's to keep Bob from, broadcasting this other one? Well, here's where this revoke key comes into play. So what they do, these revoke keys are originally held by the other person. All right. So Alice has Bob's revoke key when they create these transactions. She keeps it to herself. And she doesn't give it up until they agree, well, we're not going to use this anymore. We're not going to use this transaction. It's no good anymore. So she'll send Bob the Bob revoke key, and Bob will send Alice the Alice revoke key. All right. So let's say they've done this. They've agreed not to use this transaction anymore. They sent these revoke keys to each other. And they send this additional message where, Alice gets back 1 Bitcoin here. Well, what if Bob still tries to spend this anyway? He's trying to, well, maybe Alice is not paying attention. Well, if Alice sees it, before 100 blocks pass by or added to the blockchain after he does this, she can use this revoke key. Right? She'll use her revoke key. Right? She'll block this, and she'll claim, all of Bob's Bitcoins. Okay. All right. Let me write this down so you can see that. Let me go over that again. This is kind of a critical thing here. Maybe that's a little messy. We write it out again. All right, so we had this funding transaction with 20 Bitcoin. Alice and Bob both have to sign it. They've agreed not to spend this. That sends 18 Bitcoin to Alice, 2 to Bob. And so they transferred these revoke keys to each other. So they'll know they'll never go back and use it. Okay. Well, why do they both? Here's another thing. Why do they both send to each other? When here, this next transaction they want to do, they know Alice is the one who's gaining. So, what does Bob have to give her? Hers as well. What does Alice need to give Bob one as well? Well, it could be later on down the line that this would, be beneficial for Alice to take. They could, at some of the later date, they could make some other transaction would be beneficial for Alice to go back to this. So, they need to keep track of these for each of these transactions, because there could be the case at some point down the line that Alice is actually giving up more Bitcoin and is supposed to only receive a smaller amount of this. Right? So she'll need she'll need to send it to Bob as well, so Bob can be sure that she doesn't try to cheat him over at a later date. All right, so this would give Alice 19 and Bob 1. Okay, and like we said, what if Bob broadcasts on the network? They agree not to do this. He tries to be sneaky. He tries to broadcast 18 to Alice's address and 2 to his address. And as he tries to send this, transaction right here. Well, Alice needs to catch it. For 100 blocks pass. If she does, Alice can use the private revoke key. All right. And she'll claim every bit of the funding transaction. She'll claim all 20 Bitcoin in the fund transaction. And that's what happens with what that's why they have this setup where you punish the person. It's not going to be just that Bob is going to be punished as one and just get the, what they agreed upon, where Alice just gets back one more. No, she's going to get all of it. So they have this additional punishment here to make sure that people don't try to do this. Okay. Right. And so they need to be some sort of incentive for them not to try it. So they punish them by rewarding, the full funding transaction. Okay. Bob's not gonna get anything. Not only is he not gonna get this 2 Bitcoin, he's not even gonna get 1 now. He's not gonna get anything because he was trying to be dishonest and Alice caught him. Okay. All right, so this is showing how 2-party channel. But what about if you want to send through multiple people, and you don't want to set up these channels with each other, because you have to use your own Bitcoin, you have to set it aside and use it for a funding transaction. You have to pay a fee to set it up. So we'll talk about that next, where you have a multi-party channel and how that works. Okay.